In today's video, we have some updated information which came from last night's Saturday headline segment on Hockey Night in Canada on all the latest NHL trade rumors. In today's video, we're talking about the LA Kings, the Philadelphia Flyers, the Washington Capitals, and the St. Louis Blues. We'll get into all the latest info coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, we have some updated information on the latest NHL trade rumors, and this information all came from last night's Saturday headline segment on Hockey Night in Canada's second intermission. The Saturday headline segment and during the second intermission on Hockey Night in Canada is always a very valuable resource of information. You got insiders like Elliot Friedman and Chris Johnson, as well as Ron McLean and Nick Kyprios talking about all the latest inside scoops, and we quite often get a lot of really good, solid, valuable information from reliable sources. So let's dive into what they were talking about last night. Now, of course, they touched on the St. Louis Blues here yet again. Now, of course, the Blues are a team we've been talking about a lot lately as their struggles continue. I mean, we saw them fire their head coach earlier in the season. They've named one of their assistants, Craig Berube, as an interim head coach. But as of right now, they have not come to terms on a new permanent head coach. So they're kind of waiting to see how Berube does, I guess. Also looking around the market. Doug Armstrong did indicate it wasn't going to be a rush job to kind of get somebody else in there. He wants to make sure it takes his time and gets the right person behind the bench for the Blues. But of course, we've had information that we've discussed here recently indicating that there are sources around the league saying that Doug Armstrong is willing to look at anything and everything, and no player on that roster would be considered an untouchable. While some of that information might seem to be a little crazy, and, as much as the Blues might decide to tear it down, I personally disagree with that and don't really think they need to go that drastically here. Now, I realize this season has not gone well at all. They made a lot of moves in the offseason. Obviously, kind of looked at themselves at least as a contender. I know I viewed them as at least a playoff team. I didn't think they'd finish like super high in the standings, but they should be able to get at least into a wild card, if not the top three in their division. But this season so far might very well be lost as they keep falling further and further behind here in the standings. But the big name in St. Louis that's most surprisingly not untouchable is Vladimir Tarasenko. I mean, we've already talked about the Alex Pietrangelo trade rumors, but the Leafs possibly being interested. And really, like I said, even if you don't look at it from a player movement perspective, but just from a financial perspective, that might actually make some sense here over the next year or so as they have to re-sign him, and it might prove to be too expensive. But from a Vladimir Tarasenko's perspective, with 4+ 30-goal seasons under his belt, he doesn't have a crazy contract. He's making $7.5 million. But based on some of the newer contracts that have been signed since, that could come across as a potential bargain, if he continues to score 35 to 40 goals a season like he's been doing. For them to move Tarasenko would be a strong message that they're certainly looking at rebuilding and going in a whole different direction. Now, the insiders on Saturday headlines, like Chris Johnson especially touched on this, that a lot of teams look at Tarasenko as kind of being the Phil Kessel type, that perhaps he's not, the guy on the team who can take them to too much success. He's more of a secondary complementary piece. As we see what Phil Kessel was able to do in Toronto, he always put up great numbers. But when he was a guy they were kind of focusing on building around, he wasn't quite that guy. But he goes to Pittsburgh, plays with some other guys as a secondary piece, complementary piece, and he's done phenomenally well and got some championships to his credit here. So Tarasenko might be a player that kind of falls in line exactly like Phil Kessel did. And other teams might be looking to bring that on, especially with a $7.5 million cap hit. In a lot of teams, he wouldn't even necessarily be their highest paid player. There was a report as well from Joe Haggerty, who covers the Boston Bruins quite closely. He was suggesting that the Bruins should go heavy after Tarasenko. He feels like he'd fit in quite nicely on the wing with David Krejci to really upgrade their top six. He felt perhaps a trade like a Torrey Krug, maybe a Jake DeBrusk might get that accomplished. I mean, obviously, Torrey Krug's making, I think it's around $5 million. He's a pretty good puck-moving defenseman. Generates a lot of offense. I'm not sure the Blues would go for that. Not that those players wouldn't be an attractive package to at least consider. But I think if the Blues are going to go to the Bruins for a trade involving a big name like Tarasenko, I'm pretty sure they're going to want McAvoy coming back, not Krug. At least that would be the initial ask. But, depending on what they decide to do, is certainly something I guess they could consider. And I don't blame Joe Haggerty for saying the Bruins should go after Tarasenko, really. If you take a look around the league, there's all kinds of teams that you really could use that type of player for sure, and it might be just that one secondary piece from being, a legit, solid Stanley Cup contender. So I kind of understand his rationale, but there's plenty of other options around the league here as well. Now, of course, one big other key factor here is that Vladimir Tarasenko does have a no-trade clause, but it's not effective as of yet. It only kicks in on July the 1st. So once July 1st comes around, obviously it's going to be much more difficult to move him. Now, I'm not sure if it's a full no move. I think it's a partial, but depending on how many teams they've let him put on his no-trade list, it could certainly make things much more complicated. So could we see a Vladimir Tarasenko trade happen from the Blues? I think that they have to look at everything right now, but I think they should be very careful with this. These types of players who can score like he can don't come along that easily, and they need to be very cautious with this move to make sure they don't make a rash decision here. Personally, I think they're a new head coach and maybe some defensive play away from being a lot more respectable. So we'll see. I mean, some of their other free agents like Maroon, Bozak, I think you could safely say those deals might not have worked out the best like they're hoping for. I know I've seen a lot of Blues fans not real pleased with them in their play, but their higher end players like even Ryan O'Reilly, for example, has played pretty well. You've had Schwartz out injured, so hard to say. There's a lot of little things with the Blues that could certainly use some work here, but could Tarasenko be on the go? I think that a name that big would be more likely, especially with term on his contract that we see in the offseason. But we'll see what Doug Armstrong decides to do. The basic information from Saturday headlines is that teams are watching the Blues closely. There's lots of interest in Tarasenko, but I'm not completely convinced that there's many GMs around the league convinced that Doug Armstrong wants to make that trade, but it's not going to stop them from inquiring and seeing if they can get their hands on a 30 to 40 goal scorer to move over to their roster. Now, I want to touch on the LA Kings here real quick. Obviously, of all the guys that we've been talking about for LA that could be moved, obviously there's been Jake Muzzin, Alec Martinez. We touched on Jonathan Quick the other day, but I want to go back to a player that we've talked about before, and that's Jeff Carter, who's still young enough and productive enough that he could be a big help, I think, to a lot of teams down the stretch here. He doesn't have a crazy contract. He doesn't have a no-trade clause, so the Kings are able to move him should they wish. But the big thing that came from the Saturday Headlines update was that Jeff Carter is quite happy in California and might not be very interested in moving his family. So it's being strongly suggested that if any teams contact the LA Kings regarding Carter's availability and the potential making a trade for him, that they would need to speak to him and his agent first to make sure it's a good fit and that he'd be willing to move there. There certainly is some speculation out there, though, that if LA tries to trade Jeff Carter and he does not want to go to the team that he was traded to or doesn't feel like it's a fit for his personal life as well, that he very well just might retire. If he were to retire like that, I believe the Kings would be stuck with a recapture penalty against their salary cap hit too, which wouldn't be good for them. So it's a touchy situation, and even though he doesn't have a no-trade clause, I mean, we've seen this before when he was first traded to the Columbus Blue Jackets. He didn't stay there long. That did not work out, and then he was moved again over to LA. So we'll see what happens with Jeff Carter. He's a great player. He had a great career. I think he could be a good help to another team. Should they look to trade him, and it's certainly a player that I think is reasonable based on contract. So we'll see what happens with Jeff Carter. It looks like it might be more difficult to move him than they might have thought, given the fact that he doesn't have a no-trade clause. Now, I want to touch base on the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Washington Capitals, and forward Andre Burakovsky. Of course, he's quite a talented player, but it looks like he might be falling out of favor here with the Capitals coaching staff. He's been a healthy scratch a fair bit. His playing time's been decreased, and there is some chatter that he might be looking to be moved. Now, should the Capitals actually move him, they're not going to want a prospect or a pick or something in return. It was discussed on Saturday Headlines here that they are still convinced they can repeat as Stanley Cup champions. They are in win-now mode. So should they move Burakovsky, they're going to want a player who can jump into their roster immediately. Chris Johnson made note of the fact that he believes the Vancouver Canucks have shown interest and that he might very well fit in with a lot of their younger, faster, skilled players that they've been developing in Vancouver, and that the Canucks have been shopping defenseman, apparently Ben Hutton, a bit lately, and that might be a good fit for the Capitals, considering defenseman Christian Djoos is out longer term with an injury. They might want to add some depth on defense. So should they look to move Burakovsky, we have reason to believe the Canucks might be interested and that they might move a guy like Ben Hutton in order to make that happen. So we'll see what happens with Burakovsky. He's still quite young. If he can get things turned around here, I think it's certainly worth a team like Vancouver taking a small risk to take him on. One other quick note too out of Buffalo, which I didn't mention in the opener here, but Patrick Berglund has been suspended indefinitely by the Buffalo Sabres for not reporting to the team. So we'll see where this goes. I mean, he could basically be traded, but I'm not sure what the Sabres are, how they're going to handle this here. Apparently, there was some sticky situation with his contract around the time he was traded in that Ryan O'Reilly deal. There's something with his no-trade clause was changing, and he had to submit a new list of teams, and he didn't get it in time, and the Blues basically looked like they might have taken advantage of that. And obviously he went off to Buffalo and couldn't do anything about it. And I'm guessing that he's not overly happy there. This would be my guess here, considering he didn't report to the team for their latest game. I think he missed a practice and didn't show for the game as well. So not really sure exactly how they're going to handle this. I mean, hopefully they can get looked after quickly. But right now he's suspended, so I would guess that more than likely he may be looking to be moved out of Buffalo. So he very well might be looking to get moved out of Buffalo, and we very well might see Berglund move to another team where he might be happier. I'm not sure. I mean, the Sabres are obviously having a lot of success this year, so I can't see it being too much related to that. I really don't know the whole story with Berglund behind the scenes here, but things aren't looking good, and his time in Buffalo may be coming to a short close here. Now, lastly, I want to touch on the Philadelphia Flyers, and the rumor that I wanted to talk about really isn't so much around a trade. As we know, Chuck Fletcher, the new GM, is looking to make lots of trades. We've already discussed that at great length in our most recent trade rumor type videos. The latest rumor, though, is will coach Dave Haxall make it to their next game on Tuesday? The Flyers just completed a Western road trip, and it was an absolutely atrocious one at that. Their game in Edmonton, you could tell the team really didn't look like they were into it. I think the coach might have lost the players that seemed to be giving up, really. And then last night in Vancouver, they really didn't get any better. They got off to a terrible start, ended up losing 5-1. I really wouldn't have been surprised last night after the game if we saw an announcement that he'd been let go, but that didn't come. Could it happen today? Could it even happen before I get this video posted? It's certainly a possibility. Wouldn't be surprised at all. But I don't see a scenario where Dave Haxall lasts much longer as the coach of the Philadelphia Flyers. I'm not even sure that I have much confidence he'll make it to Tuesday when they return home for their next game. This team has gone from bad to worse, in my opinion. Their road trip, like I said, was absolutely terrible. And to me, when you watch them play on the ice, it looks like the players just don't care anymore. It looks like they've given up. They look defeated. And I don't see that Chuck Fletcher really has much else of an option here. Even though some of the trades they've been rumored to be discussing could be significant deals, I just don't see how even one trade right now is really going to shake that out of the team without getting a new voice in the room. So as always, I want to hear your thoughts and comments down below on everything we've discussed here today. Do you see the Blues making a big trade with Tarasenko? Will Dave Haxall make it to Tuesday? Leave me your thoughts and comments down below, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up before you go. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.